Alright, so in today's video, I'm going to talk about how confidence is killer, and not in a good way. In Eve, if you, it's very easy to outplay yourself in Eve Online by being overconfident, by going into a fight thinking just from the outset of a fight that you can just win absolutely, like you have no that you think that there is nothing that can stop you from winning this fight. That can get you killed very frequently. And I have two sets of two fights I'm gonna show you today that kind of cover this from both sides of the coin. The coin being me getting killed and me not getting killed in these fights. So I'm not trying to emphasize that being confident in Eve is bad, but just that you shouldn't be blindly confident in your fights. Having having knowledge about your enemy is useful. Having an idea of how they may or may not be fit is useful. You can kind of piece all of these components together, but it's never an absolute answer one way or another. So all that being said, I'm gonna start kicking off the first fight of the video. So this first set of fights is me fighting somebody and defeating them, and then taking another fight with that individual and being destroyed by them. So I'm looking for this rifter that is in space here. I was hunting around a little bit for a while. The cormorant was the only thing on scan, and now this Rifter has shown up, and he's got a newbie pilot name. It's a Rifter. I figure I can take the fight. So I land. I warp to where I believe he is at, and I land, and he's sitting here at this novice, but he's sitting 30 kilometers off the off my warp in, roughly 30 kilometers off the gate, and there are also a handful of wrecks here, which tells me something's going on. I watch. I start burning at him, heated micro warp drive, and I watch and I see him immediately start taking off 2 kilometers a second, just running, running, running. But I get within webbing range of him, I web him down, and then I scram him, and from there it's a pretty straightforward fight because kiting rifters aren't very tanky, as you can see. I am using my shield reppers, but I stop almost immediately because he dies almost immediately. So GF in local, he lulls in local here. Um, but I beat him. It was a really easy fight. Like I caught him and I killed him, and it took maybe 10 seconds. So from there, I reload stuff and I start I move on. Rep I rep up, and then I move on looking for more fights. Um, so later on, let me skip ahead in the video. Later on, I run into him again. This time he's in a Thrasher, as you can see here, and I'm like, I'm full on ready to fight this guy. Actually, right here, I was chasing down a comet that didn't want anything to do with me. But here, I see the name, I recognize the name, and I'm like, oh man, maybe this guy's trying to do like a kite thrasher this time. Because both of us had kind of gone our separate ways following the first fight. I jumped through a couple of systems, but eventually I circled back around here and ran into him again. So I'm thinking maybe he's trying the same sort of gimmick, but in a larger ship. Like micro warp drive artillery thrasher. That's a thing. So I warp to the. He's in line with the novice, so I figure he's outside of the novice, trying to, you know, uh, use artillery to plink away at frigates as they warp in. So I land here and I see him immediately warping off, but I use the chase camera to watch him going to the small installation. So I figure, okay, well maybe he was just bailing because he was panicking or something. So I follow him at 10 kilometers. I warped the small at 10 kilometers, following him along the way. And this is where I make my mistakes. I completely fuck this fight up. So as I land, I notice, oh, he's he's right here, right next to me, 2 kilometers away from me. Well, maybe if I get in close, I'll okay, wait, that's a problem. He burnt straight at me as I was burning straight at him. That right there should have been a red flag for me, as should the scram and web. But I'm not paying too much attention because, again, I the last fight gave me a lot of misplaced confidence. Um, so carrying on, I quote unquote catch him and I start orbiting him at 500, thinking I can mitigate damage from his guns, but he's just eating me alive with the autocannons that he is actually fit with, not artillery. So he's just tearing me apart here. It's actually a close fight because for whatever reason he he isn't applying a lot of damage. Like it's hits, it's glances, it's like a mixed bag of damage being applied to me. But then my reppers run out and he manages to just kill me here. So uh so in that chain of fights, I managed to snag an easy kill with the Rifter, and it lulled me into a false sense of superiority. Like I believed, oh man, I completely destroyed this guy the first time around. It's absolutely going to happen the second time. And that those thoughts, that mindset, uh, drove me to take the fight with a Thrasher, which is a fight I normally wouldn't take. Like, there are very few, very rare circumstances when I would actually take a fight like that, similar to the gate camping Svipple video. Normally I wouldn't fight a Svipple, but I managed to catch it in a certain set of circumstances. So this, you know, beating this guy the first time gave me that false sense of confidence, and that confidence is what drove me to lose my ship in this following fight. And you can see he was a little less salty the second time around. Uh, so the Thrasher got an easy kill because I was overconfident and I got to pod myself home. So that's the first set of fights. That's one example of how confidence can be killer. Uh, Moving on here, I'm going to skip around in this fight, in this video as well. Let me jump ahead to 6-ish minutes. Alright, so I was in Aldernat in the Hookbill looking for fights with a bunch of war targets, but the war targets left for Menamalia, I think. However, there's still a single war target in the system, and I see a Hookbill in this novice, so I'm thinking, okay, well, yeah, maybe I can take the fight. I check Freeman's kill board, and the Hookbills he's had recently have been buffer fit, AB scram web fit Hookbills. It's pretty straightforward fit, but I know from personal experience that those fits don't work. They're just expensive kestrels, expensive like cheap buffer, not expensive cheap, but just expensive buffer fit ships. So they don't work very well. So with that knowledge, now there's a difference between the this is kind of like applying the knowledge that I was talking about at the beginning of the video, how your confidence should be backed up by something. In this case, my confidence in winning this fight is backed up by the fact that I believe, which again, that's kind of shaky, but I believe he is in one of his buffer fit hook bills inside of this novice. So, uh, I will just get on with the fight and then I'll touch on what happens afterwards. So I slide into the novice to fight him. First thing I would have thought, the first thing that I check when I slide in here is whether or not he's going to be kiting me. So if this were a light missile kite hookbill, he'd probably be like way off here, like 30 kilometers away from me. because well, I haven't landed yet. Because he is immediately on top of me, that tells me he's going to be AB Brawl. So he's Afterburner Scram Web Fit, which confirms the fit that I saw on the kill board. So we both lock each other up immediately, but knowing that he is AB fit, I try to approach him as soon as possible because I'm Micro Warp Drive fit, and even though my dual webs will slow him down, you remember, dual webs are beaten by AB web. So, and you'll kind of notice during the fight, he's slowly burning away from me here. But he's chewing me apart, and it looks like I'm not really doing that much to him. But remember, if he's buffer fit, if he's shield buffer fit, this is all of his hit points in that outer layer there. Whereas all of my hit points are right here. So he slowly burns away. He's slowly trying to, well, not slowly, but he's trying to chip away at me. But with both of my reppers active, I'm able to mitigate all of that damage, and I managed to, to destroy Hitukbil. So GFs and local. He makes some comments about the my hook bill's fitting, and that comes into play here in a bit. So um, I so I actually, there's a little bit of dawdling, but I'm reloading. I decide to go rep up, and I'll skip ahead in a bit. But so what's happened here is I've defeated Freeman, and so what happens next is he leaves system here. He goes and he reships. And when he reships, let me skip ahead again. Skip ahead to about 3 minutes from. So he's returned. 3 minutes later, he's returned, and I now see. Well, I gotta wait for. Let me wait for DScan to. Basically, he shows back up in a comet, and as I've explained previously, comets are the micro warp drive dual web hook bill's worst uh, enemy, so to speak. They're the one ship that this fit doesn't really excel at. There's a lot of other ones, but they're one of the most common counters to the dual web micro warp drive hook bill. So that kind of tells me that he wants the fight. He wants to fight me, but he came back in what's effectively a hard counter. Yeah, you see the comet is now on scan. So he came back in something he knows will counter the hook bill, and I believe, I'm playing mind games in my head right now, but I believe that he believes that he brought a hard counter to the fight. So I actually take a second here. I duck out of system. I go back to Vlil, and I actually dock up and refit for an afterburner. I swap my micro warp drive out for an afterburner because I'm going back to the point of the video. I'm confident that this is what he's done. He's trying to play mind games with me, so I'm going to turn that on him. So I dock up here, and I grab an A. I swap my micro warp drive out for an AB. No, I would have liked to have tried one of the dual prop fits here, but at this point in time, I didn't have any spares set up. So instead, I just have to swap the props out. That's the quickest way for me to get back into the fight. So I also swapped the scram out because the micro warp drive requires a compact scram, but uh, the afterburner has extra CPU, so you can actually fit a Tech 2 scram, which is also important because it allows you to maintain greater range within your range control. Heated Tech 2 scram gives you an extra like 900 meters of uh, range on top of what a compact one will give you. So I refit and I head back to Aldernet. I'm fairly certain, fairly confident that Freeman will be in that novice waiting for me because he's I know I know the guy. I've encountered him number of times here in Losec, and we fight off and on. So I figure he'll be waiting for me to come fight him. And sure enough, I warp to the I warp to the novice at 10. I start heating my stuff here, but I didn't actually check to see if he was there. So as I land here, now real quick, remember, he brought what he believed was a counter to me, so I brought what I believe is a counter to his counter. So I land at the gate. There's this executor who's trying to bait us into some stupid fight. I don't really know what's going on. But I figured Freeman was inside. He wasn't, which is actually good for me in some ways because it allows me to get on top of him immediately. We're both kind of calling each other out for countering in local. It's pretty great. So he says standard AB comment. He's actually, well, I'll be honest here, I don't know what the standard is. I believe that standard AB comment would be an afterburner scram web blasters, but he brought a rail comment, so he's expecting uh, because he brought rails, that tells me that he's expecting to take advantage of my rockets wanting to keep him in range. Because the normal practice would be for me to try to orbit him at range, 65, 75, 8,500 meters, and his rails will track me pretty well at that range and apply their full DPS and hurt. So, again, counters. Uh, so we'll get into this fight now. I burn straight at him with, well, I lock him up and then I burn straight at him with a heated afterburner, and a land all of my stuff on him. He deploys acolytes, so that tells me he wants to eat through my shields a little bit, but acolytes are also just generally good. I turn both of my reppers on, but I actually notice right here, I just overhealed, over-repped a little bit on my armor, so I actually turned the armor repper off because that right there was a wasted cycle on my armor. So because I managed to get in really close to him, get in within 500 meters, I'm orbiting at 500, I'm mitigating a ton of his damage. His railguns are missing me completely right there. Well, some of them are hitting, but for the most part, it's just hits or glances or misses. And you see, he's dying pretty quickly here. I'm actually, you see, I'm sitting on my 4 shield charges right there and just playing around with the armor repper because not having to worry too much about my tank. At least at that point, I'm gonna actually step back a little bit here because one thing he starts doing that I didn't pick up on right away is he actually starts heating his afterburner, like I want to say like right around here. Basically, he made it so that my transversal velocity around him was 0, so now his rails are applying full DPS. So I have to, heat all my reppers. I actually heat my afterburner itself, but that's not a huge deal for me because he died. So uh, so I managed to beat him in, what kind of looks like a close fight. Again, I still had 4 charges in the shield repper, but it was a good fight. Um, but it was a fight that I believed I would win because I believed that he believed he would win. It really is, this really was an example of mind games being applied, but it really kind of circles back to what information you have on your opponent, what sort of knowledge and everything have you built up over time, and how have you applied that in such a way, and how how confident are you in your ability to win this fight. If you're confident, and if there's evidence to support your confidence, then great job. But if you're just crazy confident, but you don't really have any reason to be, Like, oh man, I've got this crazy awesome ship, like brand new. It's so badass. I think I'm just gonna, you know, destroy anybody I see. Just kick ass left and right. Then you're probably going to end up losing somewhere, like pretty quickly too, if you're not wary of what's actually going on in these fights. Of what you if you're not wary of what you can and can't fight, of what fights you can and can't take. So all of that, it's kind of this mess, this swirling mess of knowledge just in your head that you have to kind of sort through and pick up the little tidbits here and there. And it's never really going to be an absolute I'm going to win or I'm going to lose. In this example here, at the tail end here, we're both playing mind games, and he very easily could have outplayed, just beaten me anyways. Trying to make me think that he's doing something crazy when he's really not. One example that I can come up with here, just on the spot, is if he had brought a rail kite hook bill, specifically like a micro warp drive, warp disruptor, web hook bill, um, not hook bill, sorry, comet. If he brought a railgun, micro warp drive, warp disruptor fit comet, that probably would have beaten my afterburner hook bill because I wouldn't have the range to apply damage to him and I wouldn't have the speed to catch him or get away from him. But I was fairly confident that he was going to come back in an afterburner railgun fit uh, comet, and my belief in that managed to pay off in the end. So it's always good to do your research, is another good point here at the very end of this video. So hopefully throughout all this, hopefully you enjoyed the fights. Hopefully you learned something. Have a good one.